The evening at the community center began like any other charity event. The place had been decorated with soft lights and warm colors to make the guests feel comfortable. People in elegant clothes walked around holding small plates of appetizers, chatting with easy smiles and polite laughs. It was the kind of event where everyone tried to look calm and graceful, even if they were tired from a long day. During all this, a simple woman named Lena moved quietly between the tables. She wasn't a guest. She wasn't someone important. She was just helping with the event, carrying trays, picking up empty glasses, giving directions when someone got confused. She did these things with a soft smile because she didn't like making anyone feel ignored. She wasn't loud or flashy. Most of the time, she blended into the background without anyone even noticing her. Lena wore a plain shirt and dark pants. Nothing special. Her hair was tied back in a loose way, like she didn't want to spend too much time on herself. But there was a calmness about her, a gentleness that made her easy to trust. Even so, in a room full of people who liked to show off their money and connections, she looked almost invisible. Near the corner of the hall sat an old piano. It was pushed against the wall, as if someone had tried to hide it. Dust rested on the top, and the wood looked dull and scratched. A few keys were uneven, like they had been stepped on or had swollen with age. Others stuck in place. Anyone with even a little musical knowledge could see it wasn't in good shape. It definitely wasn't there for performance. It was more like a piece someone forgot to throw away. A group of guests noticed the piano while they were talking and laughing. They had already enjoyed their drinks and were getting louder, more playful. One of them pointed at the piano and said, "I wonder if this thing even works anymore." Another laughed and said, "Probably not, but maybe someone here can entertain us and try to play it." They weren't serious. They were just being silly, like people often become when they feel too confident in front of an audience. Their eyes began to wander, searching for someone harmless to tease. That's when they noticed Lena walking past with an empty tray. One of the guests nudged the others and whispered something. They all grinned at each other, the kind of grin. That meant trouble was coming. Then one of them called out, "Hey, you there! Do you know how to play the piano?" Lena stopped. She didn't expect anyone to talk to her, especially not loudly. She looked at them with a polite smile, unsure if they were truly asking or just being playful. "The piano?" she asked softly. "No, not really." Her answer didn't stop them not. Another guest waved a hand dismissively. "Come on, don't be shy. Just try. It'll be funny." Lena shook her head lightly. "I don't think you want to hear that," she said in a gentle tone, but they kept pushing. They wanted some entertainment, and to them, it didn't matter. If someone felt uncomfortable doing it, they didn't see Lena as someone with feelings or a story. She was simply there to serve, to follow along. That's how they treated her. One of the guests tapped the old piano with his fingers and said, "It's already broken. You can't make it worse." They all laughed at that. Lena didn't join them. She simply stood there with a small, still smile. She wasn't angry. She wasn't offended. She just wished they would stop drawing attention to her. She didn't like being watched, but another guest said, "Come on, just one little tune. We need a moment of fun." A few people nearby started looking their way, curious to see what was happening. The attention made Lena's heartbeat speed up a little. She wasn't used to standing at the center of a crowd. She preferred calm corners and quiet tasks. Still, she didn't want to make the situation uncomfortable. She didn't want to look rude or stubborn. So she took a breath and said, "It's really old, and a few keys are broken." Even better. Someone laughed. That will make it funnier. They weren't trying to be cruel, not in their own eyes. They were just being playful without thinking of how their words might feel to someone else. Lena looked toward the piano. then back at the group. She didn't know what to do for a moment. But when she glanced around, she saw that more eyes were drifting toward her. If she refused again, it might turn into an awkward scene. She didn't want that. She had always been a peaceful person who avoided conflict. She preferred to go along with things rather than create tension. Finally, she gave a small nod. "All right," she said in a quiet voice, "just for a moment." A few people clapped lightly, amused, as if they had won a small game. Lena walked toward the piano. Her steps were slow and controlled. She didn't show any nervousness, but inside her chest, her heart felt a little tight. She reached the old piano and ran her fingers along the surface, wiping away a bit of dust without thinking. The familiar feeling surprised her. It had been years since she touched a piano. She sat down on the bench. It creaked loudly under her weight, like it hadn't been used in a decade. The sound made a couple of people snicker. "Careful," one of them joked. "It might break before the music even starts." Lena smiled slightly, still calm, still gentle. She wasn't bothered by the sound of the bench. She was thinking about something else. This old piano reminded her of the broken one she grew up playing as a child. Her grandfather used to repair old instruments in a small workshop. He didn't have perfect tools or a fancy studio. He worked with whatever he had and taught her that even broken things had value if you treated them with patience. She had forgotten how that old workshop smelled. She had forgotten how old wood felt under her paws. But now, sitting in front of this cracked piano, her mind traveled back in time. She touched a key. It stuck slightly before dropping down with a dull thud. A strange sound came out. Not quite. Right. Another key made a metallic ring. Some didn't work at all, Dot. A few guests laughed again. "See? Told you it was broken." "This will be good." Lena kept her eyes on the keys. She pressed a few more with different levels of pressure, like she was reading the piano instead of testing it. Her fingers moved softly, almost with affection. It wasn't the piano she grew up with, but the feeling was familiar. Some people expected her to start banging random notes. They expected the moment to be funny, messy, something they could joke about later. A simple woman playing a broken piano, easy entertainment. But as Lena continued pressing keys quietly, her eyes softened. Her breathing evened. Her shoulders relaxed. She remembered how she used to adjust her playing to match her grandfather's. Old pianos, finding ways to turn imperfect sounds into something gentle. She had forgotten how natural it felt. She didn't decide to play. She didn't plan it. It was more like her fingers moved on their own, following a memory from far away. A few notes came together, not perfectly, not smoothly, but with a strange sweetness that made a couple of people pause. They hadn't expected any actual music. They expected awkwardness, maybe even embarrassment. But the sound, even from a broken piano, didn't feel like a joke. Lena glanced at the crowd briefly, then looked back at the keys. She didn't want to overthink it. She didn't want to pay attention to their faces. She just wanted to let her hands move the way they used to. A soft melody began to form. At first, the guests were still talking and laughing among themselves, not expecting anything special. But little by little, their voices faded. The sound wasn't loud, but there was something calm and tender about it. Something that made people turn their heads. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She wasn't trying to show off or prove anything. She was simply playing the way she had played long ago, with a gentle touch that worked around the broken keys. Instead of fighting them, people were surprised without even knowing why. They watched her differently now, leaning a little closer, trying to listen more carefully. They expected wrong notes. They expected clumsy playing. Instead, they heard something simple but real, something that felt honest, like feelings turned into sound. One of the guests whispered, "Wait." She can actually play? Another leaned forward, eyebrows raised. But on this piano? A few of them looked at each other in disbelief, suddenly unsure of how to react. They hadn't imagined that the person they had called over for a joke could create a melody like this. The room didn't go silent yet, not fully, but the shift had begun. People who had been laughing now frowned in confusion, not because they were upset, but because their expectations were breaking apart. Right in front of them, Lina didn't notice any of this. She was lost in the memory of her grandfather humming behind her, adjusting strings, cheering her quietly when she hit a difficult note. She remembered being small, sitting on a stool too big for her, trying to reach the keys properly. She remembered believing she would grow up to be someone who created music every day, but life had taken her in a different direction. That dream had faded with time and responsibilities. She hadn't touched a piano seriously in years. Yet here she was, playing again without planning it. Her fingers moved with confidence built from childhood, not from practice. She knew exactly which keys to avoid, which ones to press softly, which ones needed more force. A broken piano didn't scare her. It felt familiar. People around her began to quiet down. A few walked closer, drawn by curiosity. Some of them looked uncomfortable, remembering how they had teased her earlier. Others looked amazed. A woman standing near one of the tables whispered, "This is actually beautiful." Someone else nodded slowly. "I didn't see this coming." No one. Lina kept playing softly on the broken piano, unaware that the room around her was beginning to shift. The guests who had been laughing earlier started to fall quiet one by one as the melody slowly filled the hall. It was nothing dramatic or loud. It wasn't a showpiece or something grand that belonged on a big stage. It was something much more gentle, something that carried the feeling of a distant memory. Her fingers moved with surprising control for someone who claimed she didn't play. The guests watched closely, trying to understand what they were witnessing. Lina didn't try to hide the piano's broken keys. She moved around them with ease, almost as if she had expected them to be there. A man standing near the drink table whispered, "How is she doing that on this thing?" Someone next to him shrugged, unable to answer. No one knew how comfortable she was with instruments that weren't perfect dot as she played. Her mind drifted back to her childhood, as naturally as breath moving in and out of her chest. She didn't mean for the memories to come. They came on their own, pulled forward by the feeling of the keys under her fingers. She remembered a small house at the edge of her hometown, a simple place with worn walls, a small yard, and a workshop. Attached to the back, that workshop had always smelled like wood dust, metal shavings, and old varnish. It was her grandfather's world, a place where broken things found a second life. He never had much money. He didn't buy new tools unless he absolutely had to. He reused wood scraps and stored every screw, every spring, and every little piece of wire that might one day fit into a piano or a music box or even a toy someone had asked him to fix. Whenever someone in town needed help fixing something, they came to him. People trusted him because he worked with patience, not pride. And Lina loved sitting nearby as he worked, watching his hands gently open the inside of old pianos. Like he was greeting an old friend, she used to sit beside him on a wobbly stool while he tuned strings and replaced felt hammers. Sometimes he let her touch the keys while the piano was still half open. She remembered how the sound vibrated differently back then, raw and uneven, but alive. Her grandfather used to say, "Even if a piano is broken, it still has a voice. It just waits for someone patient enough to hear it." That sentence stayed with her long after she grew up. The memory sharpened when she thought about the old upright piano that had lived in their living room. The front panel had fallen off more than once. Several keys were chipped, and a few would stick every time she pressed them. But she learned to play on that piano, not by reading sheets at first, but by listening, by feeling. Her grandfather would sit behind her, humming quietly as she tried to follow his rhythm. When she finally learned the melody all the way through, he would clap softly because he didn't want to startle her. He always encouraged her dreams, even the big ones. She remembered telling him once, "One day, I want to play on a shiny stage with a real piano." He had smiled and said, "Then you will. But never forget, a real musician can make music anywhere, even on a piano that looks like it gave up long ago." Those words echoed in her mind as she sat at the broken piano in the community center. She hadn't played properly for years, but her body remembered the old lessons. Her shoulders relaxed, her movements softened, and her fingers danced around the injured keys, like she had been teaching herself to do since she was a child. Guests had no idea what memories were moving through her. They only saw a woman who they thought had no special talent, suddenly sitting like she belonged there. One woman in the crowd whispered to her friend, "She said she didn't play. Why would she lie?" Her friend shook her head slowly. "Maybe. She didn't want attention. That was the truth." Lena had spent most of her adult life staying in the background, not because she lacked ability, but because life had slowly taught her that dreams were expensive, too expensive for someone like her who had bills to pay, responsibilities to carry, and no one to cushion her fall if she tried and failed. She had once been more hopeful. When she was younger, she dreamed of studying music. Her grandfather saved what he could to help her, but his health began to decline. Suddenly, the extra money had to go to medicine, doctor visits, and repairs around the house. Lena understood. She didn't complain. She loved him more than anything, and his care became more important than any dream. After he passed away, the workshop fell silent. She remembered visiting it weeks later, seeing the tools covered in dust, the unfinished piano repairs waiting, like open stories. She stood there for a long time, touching the wooden surfaces that once felt warm and alive. She felt alone in a way she had never felt before. Life forced her to find work quickly. There was no time for music school, no money for lessons, no stability to chase something uncertain. Slowly, playing the piano went from being a daily habit to an occasional memory. She never stopped loving it, but she convinced herself that some dreams are meant to stay in childhood. The crowd didn't know any of that. All they knew was that a simple woman had been asked to play as a joke, and now something in her playing was pulling them closer. The melody grew a little stronger, a little more confident, but still gentle. Guests put down their glasses without realizing it. A few moved closer just to hear better. The earlier laughter had vanished completely. Even those who had made the joke were now watching with a mix of guilt and amazement. One of them said under his breath, "I shouldn't have pushed her." Another replied, "We thought she'd just hit a few notes." They didn't know how small their expectations had been until she broke through them. Lena's eyes softened as she played, not because she was trying to impress anyone, but because the sound reminded her of home. It reminded her of sitting beside her grandfather, listening to him tell stories about musicians who created beauty out of brokenness. She remembered how he always believed she had talent, even when she doubted herself. For a moment, she felt like she was sitting in that workshop again, with afternoon light coming through the windows and dust floating gently in the air. She felt the warmth of those days return to her chest. She had missed that feeling more than she ever admitted. She didn't know how long she had been playing. The melody flowed naturally, changing slightly with each breath she took. She wasn't following any sheet or remembering a specific piece. She was letting her emotions guide her fingers, something she hadn't done in years. When she finally paused, the sound hung in the air longer than she expected. Or maybe it only felt that way because the room was so quiet. Not a single person spoke. Not a chair moved. The guests just stared at her, waiting to see if she would continue. Lina blinked, surprised by the silence. She looked up slowly and saw dozens of eyes focused on her. She didn't know what to do. She smiled politely, unsure if she should stand or keep playing. Her hands rested gently on the keys. She was ready to get up. The moment had been enough. A small reminder of her past. Nothing more. But then something unexpected happened. A soft clap broke the silence. Just one. It came from an older man standing near the back of the hall. At first it was slow, almost hesitant, as if he wasn't sure whether he should applaud. But then he clapped again, louder this time. Another person joined him. Then another. And another. Within seconds, the entire room filled with applause that grew warmer and more sincere with each passing moment. Lina's eyes widened slightly. She looked around, confused. The applause wasn't polite or forced. It was real. It carried a feeling she hadn't felt in years. Appreciation, respect, admiration. A few guests had gentle smiles on their faces. Others looked amazed. Some looked embarrassed, clearly remembering how they had teased her earlier. But in that moment, none of that mattered. Lina lifted her hands off the keys slowly, unsure how to handle the sudden praise. She wasn't used to attention. She wasn't used to being seen. She felt a little shy, but also touched in a way she didn't fully understand. She stood up from the bench carefully, her heart still beating softly in her chest. The broken piano creaked behind her as she moved, as if it too was tired but happy to have been used again. The applause continued for several more seconds, echoing through the hall. Lina didn't know what to do except give a small, humble nod. She didn't bow or gesture dramatically. She simply stood there with a modest smile, feeling strangely emotional. The guests had no idea that they had just witnessed the moment when a forgotten part of her heart opened again, a part she thought she had buried forever. She stepped back from the piano, thinking the moment was over, not knowing yet that what she had played and what she had awakened was only the beginning of something much bigger waiting ahead. When Lina stepped away from the piano, she expected the room to return to normal. She thought people would go back to their conversations, their drinks, their quiet gossip, and small talk. She thought her small moment would simply fade into the sea, background the way she usually did. But the atmosphere didn't go back to normal. It didn't even come close. Instead, something strange happened. The applause had softened a few moments earlier, but the people around her were still frozen in place, as if stuck between surprise and curiosity. The room had changed in a way she couldn't quite understand. The laughter that once filled the air had vanished, replaced by a kind of stunned silence, as if everyone was trying to make sense of what they had just heard. Lina wasn't used to being watched, especially not with the kind of eyes she saw now, eyes filled with questions, confusion, and something close to admiration. She lowered her head slightly, feeling warm inside her chest, almost embarrassed. She didn't know where to place her hands or how to react to so many people staring. She quietly stepped back, hoping to slip away and continue her work. She thought she could go back to picking up plates or helping in the kitchen. Anything normal, anything routine. But before she could take more than a couple of steps, someone gently touched her arm. She turned and saw a woman dressed in an elegant silver gown, someone she recognized as one of the event organizers. The woman had a soft smile on her face, not the forced kind that people sometimes use at formal gatherings, but a real one, warm and thoughtful. "Where did you learn to play like that?" the woman asked gently. Lina blinked. She didn't know how to respond. She didn't think she had played in any special way. To her, the melody had been simple, instinctive advice, something that came naturally, because it came from memories that lived deep inside her. "Oh, I just learned when I was young," Lena said quietly. "My grandfather taught me a little." The woman's eyes softened even more. "A little? That wasn't a little." Lena smiled politely, but didn't comment. She didn't see herself the way they did. Before she could walk away again, a man who had earlier teased her stepped forward. This time, he wasn't smiling. He looked almost apologetic. I didn't know you could actually play," he said awkwardly. "We weren't trying to be rude. It was just for fun." Lena nodded gently. "It's all right," she said. She didn't want him to feel guilty. She wasn't angry. She had gone through life long enough to understand that people often acted without thinking, but the man still looked bothered. "No, I mean, we shouldn't have joked about it. You were incredible." A couple of people next to him nodded, agreeing, clearly regretting how they had behaved earlier. Lena appreciated their honesty, but didn't dwell on it. She wasn't the type to hold on to small moments of thoughtlessness. She had learned long ago that people sometimes laughed without thinking, and sometimes they surprised you by admitting they were wrong. The older man who had started the applause came closer too. His face carried a look of deep thought, as if he had recognized something in her playing that meant more than words could describe. He looked at Lena with gentle interest. "What you played, it wasn't something simple," he said. "Did you study music at some point?" Lena shook her head. "No, I wanted to, but life got busy." "Life always gets busy," the man said, nodding slowly. "But it does not erase talent. And you have plenty." She didn't know how to answer that. No one had spoken to her like that in years. She felt a strange mix of gratitude and discomfort. Compliments always made her feel a little shy, not because she disliked them, but because she wasn't used to hearing them. More and more people began to gather around her, not crowding her, but forming a small circle of curiosity. She didn't know where to look or what to say. She wished she could disappear into her simple tasks again. But then, as if the room itself wanted to shift even further, someone walked forward, someone whose presence immediately changed the energy. He was a well-known pianist invited to perform later in the evening. Many guests had been waiting for his performance as one of the highlights of the event. He had a calm face, a quiet seriousness about him, and a kind of confidence that came from years of training and experience. People respected him, admired him. Some even felt intimidated by him. He walked straight to the piano first. Not to Lena. To the piano. He touched the keys gently, pressing one and listening to the broken sound it made. He shook his head slightly, surprised that anyone had produced a melody on such an instrument. Then he turned to Lena. "You played this?" he asked. "Yes," she replied, her voice soft. "And the piece, was it something you memorized?" Lena hesitated. "Not exactly. I just played what came to mind." A quiet whistle escaped his lips, a sound of genuine admiration. He seemed impressed in a way that wasn't exaggerated or dramatic, more like a musician who recognized something rare. "That's even harder," he said. She didn't know what he meant. To her, playing was just playing. She didn't follow rules or techniques. She didn't think about posture or advanced skills. She only thought about how the music felt. She followed emotion more than structure. The pianist looked at her with a thoughtful expression. "You adjusted your touch to match the broken keys," he said. "Most people wouldn't know how to do that. They would fight the piano, not move with it, but you adapted to it perfectly." Lena looked away shyly, unsure how to handle the praise. A small murmur rippled through the crowd as people exchanged whispers. Not one voice said, "That explains it." Another said, "I thought it sounded strange, but beautiful." Someone else whispered, She played like she wasn't afraid of the imperfections. The pianist studied her face for a moment, then said, "Do you play often?" She shook her head. "No, not anymore." He looked almost disappointed by that answer. "You should." Lena didn't reply. She didn't know how to explain the years that had passed, the responsibilities that had pushed her dreams aside, the quiet sacrifices life demanded without warning. Before anyone could ask her more questions, someone from the kitchen called her name, reminding her that she still had work to do. She turned toward them, relieved for the excuse to step away. As she tried to walk back to her duties, the crowd gently made space for her. Some smiled at her warmly. Others gave her small nods of respect. A few even whispered thank you as she passed, as if she had done something for them rather than simply playing a melody. She wasn't sure why, but her chest felt warm, almost heavy with emotion. She didn't understand why a simple moment caused such a reaction. She didn't think she had done anything extraordinary. She had just done something familiar, something that reminded her of home. When she reached the back of the hall, near the kitchen entrance, she finally felt like she could breathe again. She placed a hand over her heart, surprised by how fast it was beating. She leaned against the wall and closed her eyes for a brief second. She whispered to herself, "It's just a piano. It's nothing special." But a part of her knew that wasn't true. The memory of her grandfather came back again, his gentle voice, his warm smile, the way he always encouraged her dreams, even when life wasn't easy. What would he say if he saw her now? Probably something simple, like, "Ah, so you finally played again." The thought made her smile without realizing it. After a few minutes, she straightened herself and returned to helping in the kitchen. She picked up trays, cleaned up empty glasses, and moved through the room with the same calm expression she had before. She didn't expect anyone to talk more about the piano. She assumed the attention would fade, but at DIDN single quotes D. Everywhere she went, people whispered quietly, not in a mocking way, but in a curious, respectful tone. Their eyes followed her, not with judgment, but with interest. They saw her differently now, not as the simple helper who blended into the background, but as someone who had just revealed something unexpected, something quietly powerful. A man approached her again while she was carrying a stack of plates. "Excuse me," he said softly. "May I ask, how long have you been playing?" She didn't want to lie. "Since I was a child," she said. "And you stopped? Why?" She paused for a moment, unsure if she should answer such a personal question. "Life changes," she said simply. "Sometimes we have to let go of things." She didn't say it with sadness. She said it with acceptance. The man nodded slowly, understanding more than she realized. Later, when she moved to pick up empty glasses near the far table, the pianist approached her again. He wasn't pushy or overwhelming. He stood beside her quietly for a moment before speaking. "You know," he said, "talent like yours doesn't disappear." She looked at him briefly, unsure what to say. He continued, "Some people train for years and never develop the kind of sensitivity you showed tonight. That's not something you learn from a book. That's something that comes from feeling." Lena looked down at the glasses in her hands. "I don't know if it's talent. It's just something I used to enjoy. Enjoyment is where real music comes from," he replied. She didn't know how to respond. She wasn't used to deep conversations about her abilities. She wasn't used to being seen so clearly. Before he left, he said, "If you ever want to play again, even on a proper piano, let me know." Then he walked away, leaving Lena standing there with a strange feeling in her chest, something between gratitude and confusion, something she hadn't felt in a long time. The rest of the evening continued quietly around her. The event went on. The guests mingled. The pianist performed later on a diff. Part 1. The day began like any other in the small town, quiet and slow, with people moving through the morning with little rush. The community center was busier than usual, though. There was excitement in the air, the kind that spreads through. Whispers and small smiles. A famous American musician was visiting the town for a day, offering a short workshop to young music lovers. His skill with the trumpet was known in many places, and for people who lived far from big cities, this felt like a once-in-a-lifetime moment. Inside the hall, students carried their instruments carefully, checking valves, wiping mouthpieces, and tuning notes that echoed softly in the room. They were dressed simply, but their faces showed the pride of young people who had practiced for a long time just to be here. Some had been waiting for days, talking to their friends about what they planned to ask him, what they hoped to learn, and how they wished to be noticed. The musician arrived with the kind of confidence that comes from experience. He greeted everyone warmly, and the crowd welcomed him with applause. He was friendly, charming, and carried himself like someone who had been on many stages. When he lifted his trumpet, even just to demonstrate a simple note, the room fell silent. With admiration, among the group stood a young woman who didn't try to stand out. She wore simple clothes and held a trumpet that looked older than the ones the other students carried. The silver coating had faded in some parts, and there were small dents that suggested years of use. She didn't speak loudly or push herself forward. Instead, she stayed near the side of the room, watching everything quietly. Her eyes followed every movement, every small gesture, as if she was trying to learn without drawing attention to herself. Some of the other students knew her. They had seen her around town, sometimes practicing near the river or sitting alone with her trumpet on the steps behind the community hall. They knew she could play, but they also knew she never performed when people were around. If someone walked by, she would stop immediately, almost as if she was startled. No one knew why she avoided attention, but they had learned not to ask. The musician walked around, giving small suggestions, adjusting someone's hand position, correcting posture, offering compliments when a student produced a clean note. His presence filled the room with energy. Everyone wanted to impress him. Everyone wanted to be noticed. After a while, he invited the students to take turns playing short pieces. Some played confidently, others nervously. He listened with patience, nodding thoughtfully, sometimes smiling, sometimes giving gentle advice. The room was filled with applause after each student finished. It was a warm, encouraging environment. Eventually, his eyes landed on the young woman standing in the back. She was holding her trumpet low, almost as if trying to hide it. But the musician had noticed her quiet presence from the moment he walked in. Maybe it was the worn instrument that caught his attention, or the way she watched everything with intense focus. He pointed toward her with a friendly smile. "You in the eye." "Back," he said in a light, teasing voice. "I haven't heard you play yet. How about you show us something?" The room reacted with small murmurs. A few students turned to look at her. Some of them smiled supportively, but others were simply curious. She froze for a moment. Her fingers tightened around her trumpet. She hadn't planned to play in front of anyone today. She had only come to listen, maybe to learn a thing or two from a great musician. She took a small breath and shook her head politely. "I'm okay," she said softly. "Please let others play." Her voice was barely loud enough for everyone to hear. The musician raised his eyebrows, surprised by her refusal. He wasn't offended, if anything. For many people, that would have been enough encouragement. But the young woman only grew more uncomfortable. She looked down, her shoulders slightly tense. It wasn't shyness in the ordinary sense. It was deeper, like someone protecting something fragile. The musician didn't seem to understand that. He stepped closer, still smiling. "Tell you what," he said, lifting his trumpet. How about a little fun? A short duel. Nothing serious. Just a few notes back and forth. I play something, you answer. The room filled with excited whispers. A duel with a famous musician. This was something people would talk about for months. The students near her looked at her with wide eyes. Some whispered encouragement, urging her to try. Others simply watched, curious about how she would respond. She felt her heart beating faster. A duel was the last thing she wanted. Not today. Maybe not ever. She had spent years avoiding attention, avoiding stages, avoiding pressure. The thought of playing even a simple tune in front of a room full of people made her chest tighten. But the musician continued speaking, still unaware of how his excitement affected her. It'll be fun, he said again. Let's give everyone a good show. His light-hearted tone made the room laugh gently. Not in a cruel way, but in a way that suggested they thought she was simply being too modest. The young woman looked. Around, every pair of eyes was on her. Some hopeful, some amused, some encouraging. She felt trapped between her fear and the expectation in the room. She took another breath, trying to soften the moment. It's okay if she doesn't want to, the instructor said kindly. She came to observe. That's also fine. But the musician had already stepped into the playful role of challenger. Come on, he said with a grin. I promise I won't make it too hard. His confidence filled the room with laughter again. It wasn't meant to pressure her, but it did. The sound of the laughter wrapped around her, not in a cruel way, but in a way that made her feel small, like everyone expected her to fail quietly. She looked at her old trumpet, its dense and faded shine reminding her of long-ago days, when she used to play without fear. She remembered the person who once taught her, someone who had believed deeply in her talent. Someone who encouraged her to play from the heart, not for approval. That memory stirred something inside her. She lifted her head slightly and looked at the musician. His eyes were bright and full of confident challenge. The room waited. Silence spread slowly, turning the moment into something larger than she expected. She swallowed once, then took a soft breath. Her voice came out steady, even though her hands trembled. All right, she said quietly. Just a short one. The room reacted instantly. Some students gasped softly. Others clapped or whispered excitedly. The musician smiled proudly, as if he had just convinced someone to join in a harmless game. The instructor watched her with thoughtful eyes, knowing there was more behind her decision than the room realized. She stepped forward slowly, her old trumpet in her hands. Every step felt heavier than the one before it. She wasn't sure why she had said yes. Maybe it was the pressure. Maybe it was the memory of her mentor. Maybe it was something she had been avoiding for too long. She reached the center of the room, standing across from the musician. He lifted his trumpet with an easy confidence, giving her an encouraging nod. Ready? He asked. She didn't trust her voice, so she simply nodded. The duel hadn't even begun. Yet the moment already felt like something that would change the course of the day, maybe even more than that. The room settled into complete silence. Waiting for the first note. The musician lifted his trumpet to his lips, preparing to play the opening line. And she stood there, heart racing, hands trembling slightly, about to face a moment she had spent years avoiding. No one in that room knew how everything was about to change. When the last soft notes faded into the air, it felt as if the whole room stayed frozen in time. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. It was as if everyone needed a moment to understand what had just happened. The woman at the piano slowly lifted her fingers from the keys, letting her hands rest gently on her lap. She didn't look around immediately. Her breathing was steady, but her heart was racing faster than she let anyone see. For a few seconds, the silence continued, the kind of silence that feels meaningful. The kind that follows a moment so unexpected and powerful that no one wants to break it too soon. The guests stood still, some of them holding their breath without realizing it, some of them blinking away the shine in their eyes. Then, suddenly, someone near the middle of the room began clapping. Just one person at first. The sound echoed through the quiet space like a spark, and within seconds, more hands joined. Then more, and then the entire room erupted into applause. It wasn't polite clapping. It wasn't the kind of forced appreciation people often give at events. It was full, strong, honest. The kind that comes straight from the heart. She slowly lifted her head, surprised by the intensity of the reaction. Her eyes widened slightly, and her lips parted as if she wanted to say something, but didn't know what. She wasn't used to applause. She wasn't used to being seen at all, let alone being celebrated. But the room wasn't just clapping, they were cheering. People smiled, nodded, and some even wiped away tears. The event organizer stood closest to the front, his hands pressed together as he applauded. He was one of the first to step forward, still clapping, his face filled with a mix of awe and shame. He looked as if he wanted to apologize right away, but didn't know how to start. Another guest near him shook his head in disbelief and murmured something under his breath, overwhelmed by what he had just witnessed. The woman at the piano stayed seated for a moment. Her eyes were soft, almost unsure. She didn't expect praise. She didn't even expect silence. She thought people might laugh or shrug or move on with their evening as if nothing happened. But the applause continued, and the warmth of it spread through her chest. She felt like she was being seen in a way she hadn't been seen in years. She slowly stood up, placing a careful hand on the side of the piano to keep her balance. The instrument looked even older, now that the moment had passed its chipped wood. Scratched front panel and loose legs were obvious. And yet, to her, it felt beautiful. It had come alive in a way she hadn't expected. It had helped her share something she had kept hidden for so long. A man approached her first, dressed neatly in a dark jacket. He looked like someone who had attended many events like this before. He extended his hand warmly and said in a soft voice, "That was incredible. Truly." She hesitated for a second, but then gently shook his hand, offering a quiet thank you. Another woman stepped forward, someone who earlier had been laughing at the thought of a broken piano performance. Her cheeks were flushed now, and she spoke with a voice that was smaller than before. I didn't know you could play like that," she said, her eyes filled with regret. "I'm sorry if I made you uncomfortable earlier." The woman at the piano gave her a small, forgiving smile. She didn't hold any anger. She never did. Behind them, more people began to gather around her, forming a loose circle as they spoke with soft admiration. Some told her how beautiful the piece was. Others asked where she learned to play. A few simply thanked her without finding the right words to express what they felt. The moment had touched them deeply, and they struggled to put the feeling into sentences. Someone near the back whispered, "Why didn't she ever perform before?" Another answered quietly, "Maybe she didn't think anyone would care." The young man who had recorded the performance stepped closer, his phone still in his hand. He looked almost embarrassed to approach her, but he gathered his confidence and said, "I hope you don't mind. I recorded some of it. It was too beautiful not to. If it makes you uncomfortable, I can delete it." She looked at the phone for a moment, unsure how to respond. Then she nodded gently and said, "It's okay." He smiled with relief. "Thank you. I think people should hear what you played." She didn't quite know how to feel about that. The idea of people watching her online made her stomach twist a little, not out of fear, but out of disbelief. She had spent her life feeling invisible, not expecting anyone to notice her. The thought of strangers being moved by her music felt strange, almost unreal. While the guests continued to ask her questions, the event's pianist, a tall man who had been scheduled to perform later in the evening, slowly walked forward. He carried himself with quiet dignity, but his eyes showed admiration rather than ego. He approached her with a gentle smile. "I was supposed to play tonight," he said in a calm voice. "But after hearing you, I think the piano has already given its best performance." His words were honest, not self-pitying or sarcastic. He truly meant it. She blinked with surprise, unsure how to respond to such kind humility. "I only played a little," she murmured softly. The pianist chuckled lightly. "If that was a little, I would love to hear what a lot sounds like." A few people around them laughed gently, easing the tension in the air. For the first time, she felt like she wasn't standing in a room full of strangers. The warmth around her made her shoulders loosen, her breathing easier. She felt just for a moment like she belonged. The event organizer finally approached her directly. He had stepped back earlier to let the guests speak to her first, but now he walked forward with a softened expression. "I owe you an apology," he said, looking sincerely into her eyes. "I shouldn't have encouraged what happened earlier. I didn't know who I was talking to." She looked at him calmly and shook her head. "You didn't know," she replied gently. He nodded, still feeling the weight of guilt, but also feeling thankful she was kind. He took another breath before speaking again. "Your performance, it was more than music. It changed the whole night." She gave him a small smile. "Thank you," she said softly. She didn't know what else to say. She wasn't used to compliments. She wasn't used to being the center of attention, but she handled it with quiet grace. A small group of guests continued talking nearby, replaying the piece in their minds. One said, "I wish I recorded the whole thing." Another responded, "Even hearing part of it was enough." Someone else added, "She should be playing on real stages, not just here." Their words floated into her ears, making her heart flutter in a complicated way. Part of her felt touched, deeply touched, but another part felt uncertain. She had lived her life in small spaces, small moments, small responsibilities. Big stages sounded like a faraway world she had no place in. But the idea lingered quietly in her mind, like a seed, unsure if it would grow. As the guests continued mingling around her, a couple approached her gently. Their eyes were still a little red from the emotion. The woman of the pair placed a hand over her heart and said, "Your music, it made me remember something important. I don't know how to thank you." The woman at the piano replied softly, "I'm glad it meant something to you." People kept approaching her with gratitude, admiration, and curiosity. Some asked how long she had been playing. Others asked if she taught lessons. A few asked if she had ever performed publicly before. She answered each question with patience and honesty. Most of the time, she simply said she grew up with music, and life took her away from it for a while. A staff member who had watched the whole scene from a distance finally approached as well. He had always been kind to her, someone who treated her with respect. He gave her a small nod and said, "I always knew there was something special about you, but I never imagined this." She lowered her gaze slightly, humbled. "I didn't expect it either," she replied. Behind them, the old piano stood quietly, its worn-out frame now seeming to glow under the lights. The scratches on its surface didn't look like flaws anymore. They looked like proof that something beautiful could come from something imperfect. It felt like the piano had been waiting for someone like her, someone who understood it, someone who could bring life out of broken parts. The event organizer stepped forward again, this time holding a small card between his fingers. "I know this might be sudden," he said carefully, "but if you ever want to perform at another event, maybe even something more official, I'd be honored to help." She looked at the card, feeling a mixture of surprise and confusion. A part of her wanted to take a step back, But another part felt curiosity tug at her heart. She accepted the card, holding it gently, as if it were fragile. I don't know, she admitted quietly. I haven't played like this in a long time. The organizer smiled softly. You haven't lost anything, he said. Tonight proved that. Around them, the applause finally softened into warm murmurs as people returned to talking among themselves, though their conversations were colored by what they had witnessed. Some spoke in hushed voices about how unexpected it was. Others tried to describe how the music made them feel. Even those who didn't usually care about music found themselves affected. The woman at the piano stepped aside for a moment, taking a deep breath. She needed space to process everything. Her hands still tingled from playing, as if the keys had left their memory on her fingertips. She touched her fingers together gently and closed her eyes for a moment, letting the emotion wash over her. She hadn't peed. As the night began to settle into calmer rhythms, the woman stepped away from the crowd and stood near one of the tall windows of the event hall. Outside, the evening lights were glowing softly, reflecting on the glass in gentle shapes. She could hear the faint hum of conversations behind her, but now the room felt different, quieter, warmer, more thoughtful than before. She took a slow breath, letting her shoulders relax. Her heart was still beating a little too fast from everything that had just happened. It wasn't that she disliked attention. It was simply that she hadn't been the center of anything for so long. She had grown used to feeling small, unnoticed, almost invisible. But tonight, she wasn't invisible. Tonight, people had listened to her. Truly listened. And that felt like a different kind of world, one she wasn't sure how to step into yet. As she stood by the window, the soft reflection of the piano behind her appeared in the glass. Even from this distance, she could see its worn keys and uneven surface. And yet, when she looked at it now, she didn't see an old broken instrument. She saw a friend. She saw something that had carried her feelings, her memories, her voice when she had none. A gentle tap on her shoulder made her turn around. It was the event's pianist, the man who earlier said the piano had already given its best performance. He offered her a warm, understanding smile. Are you all right? He asked softly. She nodded. Just taking a moment. He folded his arms loosely and glanced toward the piano. You know, he said quietly, I've played at many events. Some with better instruments, some with worse. But I've never seen a room transformed the way it did tonight. That kind of effect doesn't come from a piano. It comes from the person playing it. She lowered her eyes slightly, unsure how to respond. Compliments still made her uncomfortable, but not because she didn't like them, because she didn't know how to believe them. You played with truth, he continued. That's rare. She gave him a small, grateful smile. Thank you, she murmured. He nodded and stepped back, giving her space again. It was clear he understood her need for a moment of peace. As he walked away, the woman exhaled, letting her breath out slowly. She turned back toward the window, letting the city lights ease her mind. The night outside seemed gentle, and for a moment, she simply observed the world in front of her, the quiet streets, the moving headlights, the distant sounds of late-night life. But then she felt someone else approach. This time, it was the event organizer. He walked toward her more carefully than earlier, as if he didn't want to interrupt whatever she was thinking about. Hey, he said softly. She turned slightly. Hi. He rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly. I wanted to check on you, and also say sorry again. Properly this time. She shifted her weight a little, giving him her attention. He continued, speaking slower now, sincerity filling every word. I should have never encouraged anyone to joke about the piano. Or about you. I didn't know who you were, but that's not an excuse. Everyone deserves respect. And you deserve more than what you were given tonight before you played. She looked down for a moment, then back at him. "It's all right," she said quietly. "It worked out." He shook his head. "It worked out because of your grace. You didn't get angry. You didn't walk away. Instead, you turned a moment of teasing into something beautiful." She didn't respond right away. The words touched her deeply, but she didn't know how to express that. She simply nodded. He took a small breath before continuing. "About that card I gave you?" he said gently. "I wasn't exaggerating. I meant it. If you ever want to perform somewhere bigger, something more official, I can help. You have something rare. Something people should hear." Her fingers tightened slightly around the card, still in her pocket. She glanced toward the piano again. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I haven't played in front of people in a long time. Tonight was a lot." He smiled softly. "I understand. And there's no pressure. Take your time. Think about it." He gestured toward the piano. "But if something inside you woke up tonight, don't ignore it." With that, he stepped away, giving her space again. She stood by the window for a long time after he left. The thoughts swirling in her mind were gentle but heavy. She had always loved music. It had been the one thing that made sense to her when nothing else did. But life had pulled her away, responsibilities, fears, circumstances she couldn't control. She had pushed her love for music into a quiet corner of her heart, convincing herself it didn't matter anymore, convincing herself she was too late to return to it. But tonight had changed something. It had reminded her of who she used to be, and who she still could be. She closed her eyes lightly. The melodies she had played earlier still echoed in her mind, as if the piano's memory was now a part of her. She breathed slowly, letting the feeling settle. Then she felt someone else approach. When she opened her eyes, she saw the young man who had recorded her performance. He held his phone in both hands, as if he were carrying something fragile. "Hi," he said gently. "I hope it's okay if I show you something." She nodded slightly, unsure what he meant. He turned his phone around and played the recording. It wasn't the entire performance, just a part of it, but even hearing only a few minutes brought the moment rushing back. The sound of the old piano, her fingers moving across the keys, the emotion woven into every note. It all felt surreal from the outside. She almost didn't recognize herself in the recording. He stopped the clip and looked at her. "I know you said it's okay to keep it, but I wanted you to hear how it sounded to the rest of us. You should know what you did tonight." She swallowed softly. Her eyes warmed, but she kept her expression steady. "It's strange," she whispered, "hearing it from the outside." "It was beautiful," he said firmly. I think a lot of people would want to hear this." He hesitated before adding, "If I posted it online, would that be okay?" "Only if you're comfortable." She didn't answer right away. The thought made her nervous. The idea of people seeing her, really seeing her, felt overwhelming. But at the same time, something inside her whispered that maybe this was the path she was supposed to follow. She took a slow breath. "Maybe," she said softly. "But let me think about it first." He nodded with understanding. "Of course. Take your time." He stepped back, leaving her alone again. For several minutes, she remained quiet, thinking about everything that had unfolded. She didn't ask for any of this. She didn't seek attention. But somehow, this night had shown her something she had forgotten, that her gift mattered, even if she never believed it did. After a while, she walked back toward the piano. It was still sitting in the center of the room, looking older than ever, but something about it seemed warm, like it carried the spirit of the moment they shared. She gently placed her hand on the top of it, tracing the worn wood with care. The pianist noticed her from across the room and nodded respectfully before returning to his conversation. The guests just glanced at her with admiration, still remembering what she had done. The event organizer watched her quietly, giving her the space to choose what came next. She pressed one key softly. It made a faint sound, imperfect, but honest. And that sound made her smile. Then she lifted both hands and began to play again, not loudly, not for the crowd, not for applause. This time she played for herself. A soft, slow melody filled the air. Gentle, almost like a whisper. A song that carried no weight of expectation, no fear of judgment. A melody she hadn't played in years, one she used to play late at night when she needed comfort. The room fell into a hush again, not because she demanded attention, but because the music drew them in naturally. People turned their heads, surprised that she was playing again, but this time they listened in a softer way. They could tell she wasn't performing. She was remembering. Her hands moved slowly, lovingly, tracing the old melody like touching a familiar memory. Each note was soft but warm, and even the broken keys seemed to blend into the emotion. There was something healing in the way she played now, like she was mending something inside herself, one note at a time. Some guests stepped closer again, but they didn't interrupt. They didn't want to disturb this fragile moment. A few of them felt tears rise again, not because the music was sad, but because it felt real, almost too real. When she finished the short melody, the room stayed still for a moment. Then one person placed a hand over their heart, another exhaled softly, and someone whispered, "She's extraordinary." But she didn't wait for applause this time. She stood up slowly, giving the piano one last gentle touch before stepping away. She wasn't running from the moment. She was carrying it with her dot as she made her way toward the exit. Several people thanked her again, quietly and sincerely. The young man with the recording bowed his head respectfully. The pianist gave her another warm smile. The event organizer placed a hand over his chest and nodded in gratitude. She walked out of the hall into the cool night air. The sky above was a deep shade of blue, scattered with faint stars. She stood there for a moment, breathing in the fresh air, letting the cool breeze calm the warmth inside her. She reached into her pocket and felt the small business card. She held it between her fingers, looking at the simple print on it. She wasn't sure yet what she would do with it. But for the first time, the thought of returning to music felt possible, not frightening Dot as she walked down the quiet street. She didn't feel small anymore. She didn't.